Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 Beyond Addiction Conference. I'm your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I'm very excited to be speaking with Ashley Turner. Ashley is a yoga teacher and mind-body psychotherapist. She has a private practice in Santa Monica. She has 4 best-selling DVDs out and is the co-author of Aroma Yoga, How to Use Aromatherapy in Yoga and Life. Ashley also runs retreats to PowerPoints around the globe, Machu Picchu, the Kumbh Mela in India, and Stonehenge, to name but a few. Ashley, we're so grateful to have you with us today to share your expertise and wisdom with the Recovery 2.0 community. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tommy, and such good work in the world. Thank you for putting this together. It's an amazing resource for people, and it's so needed. So I'm so proud of you as my friend and soul brother, and I'm so proud and humbled to be a part of it, really. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Ashley. I want to jump right in and look at some of your perspectives with regards to addiction and recovery around the chakra system. I know you've done a lot of work in this area and put a lot of thought into it, and the chakra system is a very valuable sort of way of looking at addiction and recovery. I know it gives a lot of information and can really be a touchstone for someone to better understand themselves as they go through this process of personal transformation and recovery.
So the chakra system, the key to looking at it is looking at it more metaphorically. So hopefully as I go through each of the 7 chakras, those of you out there that aren't as familiar with it can just begin to perceive from a larger perspective. Like, what does this symbolize? And then how can I apply it into my life? If that makes sense. So the 7 major energy centers, again, they line the spine. And I'm just going to give you an overview for a few minutes and dive into the different issues and how they're held in our tissues, that there actually is a mapping. And this is what I find so refreshing and helpful about the chakra system is it's landing it in the body. It's actually very practical. It seems abstract, but what we're talking about is actually very practical. So it's, we have this full energy body. And when you look at any system of energy, right, you can look at the Hertz scale for sound or the UV scale for light. And you have those 2 polar opposites, those 2 ends of the spectrum. So for the UV scale, you're moving from infrared to ultraviolet. And as you move from infrared all the way up through the layers to ultraviolet, you're moving into a more and more refined wave frequency. It's the same in the chakra system. You're moving from the most basic primary aspects of who we are as you move upward to the more and more refined aspects of who we are, which become more abstract, getting into the psychological and the spiritual realms of who we are. So the first chakra, the base chakra, this governs our lower body, our legs, our feet, our anchor, literally our foundation. It also governs the most tangible aspect of who we are, being our physical identity. So there's a certain sense of identity that's associated with each chakra. And this phase of development is from in utero to 12 months. So the first phase of life, when our basic function of when you're just born, your basic function is just to survive, is to create safety, to create stability, to know that you're going to survive. So when you think of that child from 0 to 12 months, it's basically just eating, sleeping, and pooping, and that's all it's doing. It's just a primary animal instinct, right? In the first phase. So psychologically, the first thing that starts to be built inside at that from in utero, also it's important to include prenatal psychology and what's going on in the womb, as well as your birth experience, perinatal psychology, and then those 12 months after. Your basic sense or the basic right associated with the first chakra is just the right to be here and the right to take up space. So in other words, we develop a sense of safety and our basic function of, do we trust the world or do we have a sense of mistrust in the world? This primarily is formed in that first year, or, including prenatal to that first year. So for example, if your parents, maybe they were arguing a lot, maybe there was verbal or physical abuse in in your home environment, maybe trauma. Maybe, your birth was really traumatic for you or your mother. Maybe your mother was really depressed. Maybe she had postpartum depression. And so she wasn't as available emotionally and psychologically to connect to that, brand new baby. Maybe one of your parents was an alcoholic and so they were, or a drug addict, and so they were kind of checked out a lot of the time. So the first way that we start to build our core sense of self psychologically is through that mirroring with our parents. So if we didn't get that mirroring for whatever reason, maybe they didn't have a lot of money and they just had to work a lot and they weren't as available in those beginning year or two, then our sense of self could be insecure. We can have what's called an insecure attachment. And again, this is stuff that's going on precognitive, pre-verbal. It's before you're even thinking or understanding what's happening. So this is the first chakra. So the addictions associated with the first chakra, if you think metaphorically, how do we create safety in the world? How do we know that we're going to survive? The first thing that we need is air, obviously, but then food and physical survival. So all of the food addictions are associated with the first chakra. It's how we begin to create a sense of safety, a sense of nurturing, a sense that I'm going to keep on living in the most basic aspect. Other addictions that are associated with the first chakra are gambling, which is also, when you think about it with money, like trying to accumulate and acquire. People that are very addictive, or hoarding, whether it's hoarding money, trying to work to build up a financial security, all of these sort of external securities. Also work, addiction to work is also a first chakra, and shopping. So shopping, food, gambling, those are the addictions of the first chakra.
Thank you. I just want to echo some of your earlier words, that this carries back all the way to your time being carried in the womb.
Yeah.
So, so as an example, if my mother was, say, drinking or smoking during pregnancy, or if she was particularly stressed or anxious during pregnancy, that can affect me as in a first chakra kind of way as a child.
Exactly. And so some certain tendencies that would show up is just what you said, a deficiency in the first chakra, or a deficiency in feeling that sense of safety and stability, looks like anxiety, restlessness, I can't settle, really fearful of the world, fearful of relationships, fearful of not having enough money, also just a general disconnection from the body. So that would look like anorexia, trying to minimize. And the opposite of that, another coping mechanism, could be an excessiveness, trying to compensate by overcompensating, which looks like obesity, hoarding, as I mentioned, material fixation, and bulimia. So those are two that are really wrapped up, and hopefully we'll have time to come back and sort of get a little bit more into the eating disorders, and especially emotional eating, because that's a really subtle addiction that's not talked about quite as much. Anorexia, obesity, and bulimia are much more severe, but emotional eating really racks a lot of people. I mean, it's a real disease. It's a real struggle for people that are just in that spin cycle. So hopefully we'll have time to come back to that one.
Great.
So I just want to go on, moving on. There are some practical lifestyle considerations, and this is what I like about the chakra system, to start applying these as well when you're working with addiction. So for example, it's connected to the earth element, the first chakra. So just getting out in nature, gardening, and actually one of the things that I think is the most important to rebuild self-love, rebuild a sense of safety and security, is making your own food for yourself. I cannot emphasize that enough. Making your own food, learning how to nurture yourself and really nourish yourself. And I know it's hard if you're a single person, you live by yourself. I've been there many times. It can be hard to make dinners for yourself and really put that effort in. But when you think about our relationship with food, this is really the primary messaging of, I'm taking care of you, you're worthy, I love you. First, hopefully we get that from our primary caregivers or parents, but then we have to learn how to give that to ourselves. So I know you're talking about this too in some of your other sessions, but it's a huge issue to really learn how to nourish ourselves and make your own food for yourself as much as you can.
Thank you. What an amazing insight. I'm working with a number of guys right now that, and myself included, in early recovery, just absolutely no understanding of even where my food comes from, or what would be the difference between non-organic or organic food. Why does that matter? Or the idea of making a meal that consists of anything but, like, say, pizza, like actually eating fruits and vegetables and feeling the goodness going into your body. That was something that came in much, much later in my recovery. And I really appreciate what you're saying. I feel like I could have avoided, I feel like I could have lessened some of the struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the point of it is that, again, not just to go to Whole Foods and get the salad bar, but to actually put your hands in your food, to put your energy in your food, that on a very deep unconscious level, you're sending the message to your deep unconscious and your sense of self that you're worth it. You're worth the investment in money, in time, in energy. You will feel that when you lovingly prepare food for yourself, and then when you create some space and just a really, sacred time to sit down and feed yourself, much like an ideal mother or good enough mother would to her child. And it really becomes a ritual, and that child recognizes the consistency and the routine, and they feel safe in the world because of it.
Speaking about safe in the world, let's just bring Millie in for a second. There she is. Okay. Really safe. Okay. Sorry. Let's keep going. So that's chakra number one. What happens at chakra number two? Where are we?
Number two. So chakra number two gets really interesting. I love them all. I don't play favorites, but chakra two might be up there for me. The second chakra governs the part of the physical body of the hips, the pelvis, the sexual organs, the urinary tract. This is developed from 12 to 24 months. So it's right when we start crawling, we start to get in that locomotion. It's connected to our emotional identity. And I'm going to add in here the elements, because the elements to me kind of help give that more metaphoric, symbolic perspective. So the element associated with the second chakra is water. So you have the waters of the womb, the waters of our sexuality, our urinary tract, and the emotions. So our emotions are much more watery. The basic right of the second chakra, when we move into that 12 to 24 months, is the right to feel, and also the right to experience pleasure. So it's what Freud actually called, in developmental psychology, the oral phase. So at that time, when a child is about that age, everything starts going in the mouth. All of a sudden, there's a sense of, okay, I'm safe, I'm secure, I'm in the world. Now, what is the world? Let me experience the world, my sensate exploration of the world. So it governs our sensory organs, obviously our sexuality, our creativity as well, being fluid in our movements. And as you can guess, the addictions that are associated with the second chakra are sex. All kinds of sexual addictions live here. Also alcohol, which connects to that liquid, to the water element. So it's the watery liquid element. And then, interestingly, heroin. This is where heroin addiction lives. And that's actually because the second chakra, the name is Svadhisthana, and it translates to mean sweetness. So when you think of our sensual, sensate exploration of the world, we're seeking that sweetness and, like, also our sexuality. So heroin really correlates as that's the kind of high that it's giving you.
And that makes a lot of sense, because when people, opiate addicts, often describe a heroin experience as orgasmic, it feels like an orgasm, or there's a sense of such release that there's a sexual connotation to it.
Right. Interesting. And so, as I mentioned, the basic right of this phase from 6 to 24 months is to feel, to experience pleasure. So if, for example, some traumas or abuses that might have occurred that could lead to an injury here, obviously we really need to talk about any kind of sexual abuse. So any kind of sexual abuse, covert or overt, in other words, acknowledged or not acknowledged, rape, incest, all of this lives here in the second chakra, and we'll feel clearly that injury there.
Now, just to be clear, that obviously doesn't mean that that instance of abuse happens between 12 and 24 months.
Correct. Of course not. Yeah.
It's just that this is the phase of when that area gets originally developed.
Right. Thank you so much for pointing that out. It's actually it's an interesting point because you could look at it from both sides. In other words, I would encourage someone that's in this investigation to look at, well, let me just, what happened from 6 to 24 months? Or at any point in my life, were there any major losses? Maybe you lost a parent at the phase of 6 to 24 months. And you didn't even have the capability at 6 to 24 months to express the level of emotion that you were clearly feeling, probably mostly unconsciously. Or if you had any traumas or abuses that occurred that are associated with the second chakra at any phase of life. Correct. Absolutely. So you could look at it either way. What happened at this phase in my life, or did I have any of these occur? Have I at any point in my life? So it could be both. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. It's a really good question. So other things that could affect that would be a lack, as I mentioned, a lack of mirroring. Also, interestingly, a lack of, invasion of others. Like if you had an enmeshment with parents, or a denial. This is a big one, denial of a child's feeling states. So maybe you're really an empathic person, or you were just a really alive, wild, sensual child, and that was shut down. Maybe you had a very religious family or something like that. And so any sort of, and I actually had some of this because I grew up very Presbyterian, conservative, Midwestern farm town in Illinois. And I'm a pretty big personality and I have a lot, to express. I was always very expressive. And I do remember always kind of having that, shh, be quiet, like kind of contain it. So sometimes that can look like then the pendulum swings the other way, and we might be sexually acting out or have to find our balance. And it might not be a full-blown addiction, but on the spectrum, we could use a little rebalancing.
And so just another thing that comes to me from my own childhood is the idea that a parent sometimes doesn't want their child to, for example, let's say the child is angry, and the parent doesn't want the child to be angry, doesn't want that child to experience that anger, particularly towards them, and they
Right.
shut it down.
Right.
They just shut that down, and there is something very unhealthy about not allowing a human being to experience what they're experiencing, right, and to feel what they're feeling within reason. I think, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, this is the house of our emotional identity. So this is the phase where we begin to build our emotional intelligence. And so many of us, I might even say as a psychotherapist, the majority of us grew up with parents who maybe didn't have as much, emotional capacity or emotional intelligence, or they just never develop the skill set of how to deal with very challenging emotions. It's challenging to deal with a kid that's having a temper tantrum all the time, or a colicky baby, or just a stubbornness or anger. Maybe there's a shame, and that's actually where we're going in the third chakra, around anger, or even just joy. Actually, the opposite is true also. A lot of us had a ceiling on our joy or our happiness. And the one key point that I want to make is these traumas or abuses or these factors might not necessarily be directly connected to you. In other words, we're often carrying karmas or effects, residual effects from generations past. So, for example, I've worked with several clients in my practice that had mothers who were sexually abused, or who were raped, and that was never dealt with. Or if you're looking at the first chakra, survival and safety, you could talk about the Holocaust, and how the Holocaust, if you have that in your blood lineage, in your family lineage, how that affect generation upon generation. So how did your parents learn how to create a false sense of safety or security? Or if it was a sexual abuse situation or a rape, how did that affect your mother? Did that affect your parents and their relationship, their expression of sensuality and sexuality? And then that is, of course, carried down to you. So you might be carrying these symptoms, and it might not even be a direct correlation to something that specifically happened in your own life.
So it's very interesting to you use the word karma, and we do come into life with certain cards, right? We're all born into a situation, and often there's so much guilt and shame around being an addict. It's really refreshing to hear for people in recovery that, you know what, a lot of this is not your fault, but it's really the playing out of things that are beyond your control.
Yeah, exactly. And in the psychology that I work with, we call it the primary scenario. It's like you're just born onto a stage and a play is already going on. And the first thing you do is just start to figure out who the characters are and what's being played out. Based on that, we all start to have different imprints, understanding and a lens that we're perceiving life through. Some of us have a lot of support in that primary scenario. Some of us don't. And yeah, I think it really helps to peel back the layer of shame when we can put it in a larger context of it's not all just your stuff. In fact, the reason that a lot of different people become addicts is because we might be the ones that are the most empathic or the most creative or have the most psychic ability. And so we're picking up on things. We have a much more sensitive constitution, if you will. And so it then plays itself out as these symptoms where other people might be repressing it in different ways. It's actually acting itself out through our system.
So fascinating. It's fascinating. So okay. So second chakra, obviously, since sex and sexuality have a part here or live here, as you say, relationships.
Yeah, it's all about the second chakra and the fourth chakra, which is our heart center. The heart center is a little more related to our emotional intimacy and our ability to give and receive love. And the second chakra is a little bit more related to our physical sexual desires and sensate pleasures. They're both intertwined, and really the work of healing is to connect the second chakra and the fourth chakra so that we're actually making love instead of just having sex. But it's just to know that your sexual life is within the boundaries that feel really good to you. That's what the second chakra is all about. Containment.
Yes. Well, just from what you've mentioned already in the first two chakras, personal security, and then sex and sexuality, and pleasuring and all of that. Right there, you've hit on some of the key triggers that people in recovery, I mean, I'm sure every human being is dealing with this on some level, but particularly people in recovery from addiction are dealing with these issues. These are core issues for us. And so I'm already loving this perspective. What happens next?
So it's interesting because the lower three chakras, as we move into the third chakra, the lower three chakras, the first three, really govern our relationship to the outer world. And so exactly what you just said, we're talking about our sense of safety, our pleasure principle, and then when we get into the third chakra, this is our power center. This is our core. So think about literally it's your digestive tract. It's all the organs associated with that. The element is fire. So it's our ability to transmute, to turn one thing into another. So if you think of the digestive tract, it's our ability to turn physical, tangible food into energy that we can use. That's the whole function physically and psychologically of the third chakra or Manipura. So what lives here is our ego identity. So now we're moving out of just feeling safe and secure in the world. Now we know we're okay. First chakra. Second chakra is, I have this five sensory, machinery. This life is incredible. I'm experiencing it and feeling my emotions. The third chakra is where we start to separate from just our parents or family of origin or just the outside world, and we begin to feel ourselves as an autonomous individual. So this is what we call the terrible twos or the terrible threes. And so it's developed from 18 to 42 months. And this is, again, that phase of really establishing boundaries. Third chakra is all about boundaries, having healthy boundaries with ourselves, first and foremost, and then having healthy boundaries, of course, in our life. So these three in particular, I think really, overlap and weave together these different aspects primarily in dealing with addiction.
And this sounds, of course, when you're dealing with the terrible twos and terrible threes. I mean, of course, the words are me, mine,
And no, and no,
and no, and no, right?
I don't do that. That's, my niece is in that phase right now. So it's really fascinating for me to watch. She's starting, we start to exert our will. And so the function of the third chakra is willpower. Having a strong ego identity. And ego, I just want to touch on for a minute because it gets a really bad rap in spiritual traditions. Like we're trying to transcend the ego. We want to slay the ego. But psychologically, what we want to do is actually build a strong sense of self, have a strong sense of ego. In other words, this is who I am. This is what's okay for me. This is what works for me. I talk about not having a high ego or a low ego. High ego is I'm the shit. Low ego is I'm a piece of shit. And what we want is the balanced point in the middle of I have nothing to prove and I have nothing to hide. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I acknowledge all my beauty and magnificence, and I acknowledge my weaknesses and my faults. So the shadow of this phase of the third chakra is shame. And this is where we get into shame and really being ashamed of ourself, our core self. And that's what can lead to many, many addictions, or ashamed of something that we've done or something in our family.
I would have thought that shame would have been, or at least in some way, associated with the second chakra as well.
Second chakra, the shadow of the second chakra is guilt. So feeling guilty.
Okay.
Being a sexual being, and they definitely bleed together. They're very interrelated for sure.
So my teacher, one of the great things he's ever said is he was referring to the pelvic bowl, and obviously we, when we're opening our hips in yoga or we're working on that area of our body, he always calls it the scene of the crime.
That's hilarious. I've never heard that. I love that.
I just think it's so funny, obviously, and apt in many ways. But we do seem to carry a lot of guilt and a lot of shame because of activities that happen there. And obviously, I get with the exertion of will, the shadow side of that, of course, I get how that could be shame as well. So very interesting.
Right. And so when you just think about like this ego sense of self, like it's my individual sense of self. So being ashamed of just who I am at my core. So that's the piece that we really want to work on healing. And so when you think about the specific addictions that are associated with the third chakra, these all have to do with, again, this is your power center. So think of it like this is your energy center. When you are one of the biggest factors, and when you have a strong sense of self, when you're confident, some of the attributes of having a strong core, a strong third chakra is being confident, pursuing your goals, again, having willpower, having a strong sense of energy, being spontaneous, being able to laugh at yourself, not being ashamed of faults or weaknesses. So it's in general having energy. That fire is lit within, right? We're heated up, we're active, we're alive, we're passionate. So the addictions associated with Manipura are addictions that are serving to artificially feed that fire. So you have the addiction of caffeine, which is one of the most subtle and rampant addictions in our culture. Also the addiction of cocaine, ramping up, and amphetamines as well. So it's this heightened sense of energy. Work, because many of us seek our sense of self and our validation and affirmation through our work. And so when we're really addicted to our work, when we're a workaholic, we can't stop. It's because we're really pursuing that is our sense of self. It's completely enmeshed in that. And then the other shadow addiction of the third chakra is anger. So this is where our fire lives. So being a rageaholic, not being able to control that fire, that's an excessiveness in Manipura.
Yeah, I've seen some of that in my family. That particularly that rageaholicism. That's painful.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's fun, and I think one important thing in addiction work is to also really acknowledge, sometimes our addictions are not as obvious as, an alcoholic or a drug addict. Maybe it's emotional eating, or maybe it's anger, or the workaholic. Like, how is that detrimentally affecting your life, and how can you bring it back into balance and just seek support through the 12 steps and through all these different kinds of approaches.
Thank you. So, all right. So the first three chakras, you're saying basically this is what grounds us here on the planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the three that are associated with our external relationship. So our relationship to work, our relationship to other people, our family of origin, our physical body, our sense of self, our sexuality, very external and physical. So when we come to the fourth chakra, we're really talking about the heart center. It's the bridge between the three lower chakras and the three upper chakras. So our relationship to our outer world, the three upper chakras, our relationship to the inner world, and the heart center, which interestingly, if you look at the body metaphorically, the heart center is the only part of the body that has a horizontal axis, which is the arms. So the heart center is the only place that we horizontally extend, which you think of the energy of a hug. It's a bringing together, it's a connectedness, and the function of the heart center, of course, is love, is unity, is to see ourselves in another person, to see them in us. The heart center then represents our social identity. It's where, okay, now, we have our sense of individual self. Now we start to up level the game. Psychologically, it's the developmental phase from 3.5 to 7 years, where you really start to build friendships and relating to other people. You go to school, you start to connect with people socially. How do you show up? How do you fit in? All of those things. And so the right of the fourth chakra is the right to love and to be loved. The element associated with this is air. So when you think, again, metaphorically, it starts to make sense. This is the part of our body where we connect with air, with our lungs. This is where we breathe in the air and we breathe it back. And that medium of air is actually what we all share. We're all breathing the same air. We can't eat the same food, but we're all breathing and circulating the same air. So I just like to think of it like that, metaphorically and symbolically, how it makes sense. The task, there's these developmental phases that we go through. The task of the heart chakra is developing our persona, our social identity, also forming loving peer and family relationships. So if there's any sort of, here's some traumas and abuses that could have affected your heart center. Obviously, grief. Grief lives here, sadness. So if you've lost a loved one, again, at any phase in your life, going through a breakup, going through a massive disappointment, grief that's more subtle, such as losing out on a creative project or abortion or miscarriage. Divorce is a huge grief, breakups, but some of these topics that don't have as much support in the outer environment can start to lead us into addiction because we don't have the support systems. Like there's not a lot of support around miscarriages or abortions. There's often a lot of shame. There's often a lot of disconnect. And so those feelings, if they're not getting processed, again, this is our heart center. So if those feelings of grief and sadness and loss, betrayal, abandonment, if you've been betrayed in a relationship, it's going to be here in the heart center, right? Your ability to love and be loved. So all of those things are topics and subjects that could affect your heart center. And so the addictions of the heart center are addictions that are actually associated with the air element. So you have smoking, you have tobacco and marijuana. This is where they live, tobacco and marijuana, which I find really interesting. People that I've worked with, and myself included, it was never like a full-blown addiction. I've always been able to manage it a little bit, but something that I have over the years slipped into is smoking cigarettes. Such a, really disgusting habit. But I noticed that I would it was never like I smoked them all the time. When I would reach for a cigarette is when I was going through a breakup and my heart was sad and I felt lonely and I felt that heartache. And I never put it together until I started studying the chakras, and I realized, wow, that's really interesting. That's what I was going to literally fill up my heart center, fill it up, which is so unhealthy, but that's what I was unconsciously reaching for. So tobacco, marijuana, and then also love addiction. This is where you really get into codependent behavior. and interestingly, sweetness. So sugar, which is sort of that love that we're seeking, this artificial love. So sugar addiction also lives here.
Wow. So let's see, codependency, sugar issues, sadness or loneliness.
Mhm.
What else?
Tobacco and marijuana.
Tobacco and marijuana. Okay. I mean, so all I can tell you is I've had issues with every one of those things.
Right?
Huge issues. So yeah, and I know that at the end of the day, we're all many of us are trying to heal a broken heart.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'm getting it.
Yeah. So connecting with, so again, different rejection, abandonment, where if you grew up in an environment that was maybe your parents or someone else was constantly critical, um, a cold environment where your family didn't express a lot of love and emotion generously. And then obviously any abuses to the other chakras, because any physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal, emotional abuse, the basic message that you're getting is that you're not lovable. So
Mm.
that can also affect the heart chakra.
So when we move up the central channel, we're past the heart center. Where are we then?
We are in the throat center, which is called Vishuddha. And the throat center is connected to the element ether. And this is where we move into, again, our relationship with our interior life. So this governs our creative identity. And it's where we begin to express ourselves. The right here is to speak and to hear truth. So you have the throat, you have the mouth, the jaw, also the ears are connected. So our sense of hearing and our voice connected to the fifth chakra. The shadow of the fifth chakra is lies. So if you grew up in a family that lied, which most addictive families are telling a lot of lies to protect either the addict or protect the family. This could really affect the throat chakra, and and this is developed from 7 to 12 years. So it's where we start to express our creative identity, where we everything from starting to dress ourselves to choosing, what we want to do and how we want to decorate our rooms or our homes, our creative identity. And the addictions that are associated with are also opiates and marijuana. So just beginning to mask. I think of marijuana as just sort of like this fog, and that's the lies. So if you grew up, again, maybe it was a silent child, maybe you were. It was a coversion, and we talk a lot in psychology about a family system is either closed or open. Either they're open and they have permeable boundaries and people come in and out of the family system, or there's a closed system, which a lot of families of addicts have a very closed system where there's walls that are impenetrable. And so if there were secrets that were being held, that could really affect this. Also the thyroid. So this is where we're talking about the thyroid and really having that balanced.
And so when you talk about your creative identity, obviously your words have to have a part of that. Your ability to communicate.
Mhm. What's interesting is that when you look at the top three chakras, the crown chakra, which we'll get to in just a second, is our connection with our universal identity. So our connection with the infinite, with our spiritual nature. So the image for me works is that we download information, or we get an intuitive hit, or we get inspired. And how we first start to translate how that infinite field of possibilities begins to download into our system, the first thing that happens is it becomes an image. And that's the sixth chakra, the eyes, the third eye center. So the first thing is we start to have an image. Oh, I think I want to lead a retreat to the Galapagos Islands, or I want to do this online, summit on addiction. That becomes an image in your mind's eye. The next way that it takes form and the way that it actually moves out into the material world is through your words. And that's why our words are so important. Keeping our word, watching how we speak about things, watching the stories that we're telling ourselves and other people. When we put the word out there, it's the first time that we're actually bringing that thought into form, and now it's out and it's shared with someone else. So that's the function of the throat chakra.
Love it. This is so thrilling, Ashley. I really,
I
I
love it. I love it. I'm obviously thrilled by it too because it's
yes,
my life work. But thank you.
I'm, I'm not sure how I feel about having dysfunction at every level of my chakras so far, but
Happened when we were in school for psychotherapy is like every single condition we're all like, oh my god, I have that, I'm a narcissist, I'm a
absolutely.
really in trouble.
Okay, well, all right. So we have now developed our ability to communicate. Hopefully, we are creative individuals, and we get up past the throat chakra. What
And
next?
it's the third eye center, and it's really interesting when we come to the third eye center. What I like to say is we're looking at the world through through the soul lens instead of just the right and left eye, which is breaking everything down into this dualistic right and wrong nature. When we develop our sense in the third eye center, the psychological phase of development, we're actually developing a wider view. The third eye, right? Where we can see from all perspectives. We don't break it down into just pleasure or pain, right and wrong. It's a much more omniscient perspective. That's the function of the third eye center, is to see truth, to see clearly. So the throat is to speak truth and to communicate it. The third eye center is to see clearly. And again, this is challenging if you grew up in a family where what you saw and what you were told didn't go together. If there were behaviors that didn't match up, um, there can be, that injury or a coping mechanism, defense mechanism. This is where we're talking about intuition, being able to see with the wisdom mind, not just the prefrontal thinking analytical mind, but really developing our sense of intuition, clairvoyance, knowledge, imagination. Imagination is huge. And so if you're talking about addiction, begin to visualize. Can you begin to imagine yourself in a healthy environment, or imagine what it would be like to be free from this addiction, or at least not in the holds of it. Developing discernment also, so really being able to see clearly, is this relationship serving me, is this friendship serving me, or is this someone that I might need to cut out of my life? So really developing the skill, and it's like anything else, it's a muscle that we build, being able to see clearly.
I love that. I like to say that everything in the world is created twice, first in the mind and then actually in the manifest world. So it really supports what you're saying. And I love Bob Marley's quote, put your vision to reality.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
And I know I found for myself, like, the visualization is so key, and it's really a skill that I've had to develop. And I think for many of us, we hear, oh, intuition, visualization, like, it's very abstract. And I mean, I've really actually felt tension in my brain when I'm trying to visualize or concentrate on something, because I really have to pull, and this is where meditation comes in. It's so powerful to develop that skill set of challenging ourselves to see other perceptions, to see through another lens, especially when they're so ingrained and maybe we've been living our whole life a certain way. So to start telling ourselves a different story and see a different possibility, it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of work, and it's there. The support is there for us. So this is developed in puberty, this discernment and this ability to imagine and create a wisdom mind, where we're creating it. When you think about puberty, it's really that phase between child and adult. So you're not just being driven by the more primary aspects. Now you're starting to also bridge and develop into that wisdom mind, symbolized by an adult. But where you're developing a wisdom mind and being able to discern and say, okay, this is a choice that's healthy, this is a choice that's not. So it's developed in puberty, and the addictions that are associated with it are hallucinogens and marijuana. So again, both, like, let me shift my lens. Let me just when I think again of marijuana, it's sort of like a spacing out, a numbing out, and hallucinogens, obviously, to just completely check out and see a different story, and go into other worlds or whatever. So those are the addictions associated with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
traumas and abuses that I just want to run through could affect the development of this. If you notice yourself slipping into this is, again, you see what you see and what you're told are different. Also, very important, an invalidation of intuition or psychic abilities. So if a child is maybe really artistic or maybe really intuitive, but that's shut down by a family that doesn't understand it, it can really impinge this phase. And I think what's interesting with addicts, we kind of touched on this a minute ago, a lot when you look at sort of the spectrum of the psyche and this layer of very, highly creative, empathic, more right-brained, many addicts are much more right-brained and are much more sensitive to information. And when you think of, the great artists or artistic geniuses, I think of Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin or, people that were really riddled with addiction. And I actually worked with a client who is a really successful rock star, and he was really battling addiction, and we were working on how much was being downloaded. And this is where you get into the relationship between the lower and upper chakras, that it's not just about trying to get more refined and up and out of. For those people that are really highly intuitive and creative, a lot of times the challenge is that their physical body or their life is not grounded and stable for them to be able to contain that much energy and spirit or inspiration or creativity. And so what happens is that creativity in yoga, we talk about Shakti prana, it just literally starts to blow your circuits. And so if you don't have a strong, stable foundation, which would be the lower three chakras, maybe your financial house or your physical body isn't stable and strong, those energy systems can spin, and often what it spins and turns in on itself into addiction. So that's a huge factor in addiction as well.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, I guess we come to the grand poobah here, which is really the crown chakra. What can you tell us about the crown chakra?
The crown chakra is called Sahasrara. It's really where we begin to move beyond form. So we're working with, again, our universal identity. There is no food, there is no color associated with it. It's where we're moving into that field of infinite possibilities, and it's developed through the whole phase of life. So there's not just one limited phase of life. It's really our spiritual nature. And so the addictions that are associated with this are spiritual addiction, and seeking that endless. And I know in the yoga world and the spiritual world, I see this a lot. I see an addiction to religion or spiritual practices, where you just sort of, Ram Dass talks about spiritual bypassing and spiritual materialism, sort of just going from one teacher to the next and one thing to the next, not maybe trusting your own intuition or not just settling and grounding into all of that. So what this would look like if you have a healthy sense of Sahasrara is being able to perceive from all different angles, being able to analyze, even having a critical mind, being able to assimilate information, wisdom, also just having a sense of a spiritual connection. So opening this gateway where we really develop our spiritual relationship to whatever the God of your own understanding is. This is where we can draw on support that's outside of just us. This is prayer, this is meditation, this is reading spiritual texts and books like the Big Book that are really helping us connect to a larger sense of ourself, as we talked about sort of with karma, that it's not just about this own little minute individual life that I'm experiencing, but how can I up-level? And I think of it as a computer literally plugging in to the motherboard. Like, how can I get some more, help, get support, get information, get intuition, spiritual nutrients.
Love that. Well, with recovery, of course, we have a problem, and we're approaching that problem, and we realize that at least from the 12-step perspective, our issue seems to be an issue of a lack of power. And so, as you put it, where can we reach to get access to more power, to plug into the motherboard and to grab more juice, so that the power that we have access to is actually bigger than the problem that we're facing.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Other modalities of recovery would put it differently. Some prefer to approach the problem of addiction in a less spiritual way, in a more scientific medical way, and I have no personal opinion on anyone's approach. My goal is to do away with addiction and the pain that goes along with it through whatever modality works for you. And you have just painted an unbelievable, bright, amazing picture of the chakra system. So if just a quick question for anyone who might not understand it, if you were to do an autopsy on a human being, would you find that the 7 chakras in the body?
Right. So the chakra system is connected to what's called our pranic body, or our energy body. It's the subtle body. So it's sort of like when you think of your computer, it's how the energy is moving through all the meridians, all the different power points, and you wouldn't find the physical evidence of it's on the energetic body. So it's in the subtle realm. It's not physically present, but actually what the chakras correspond to, which is really interesting, and also with recovery, is that the chakras correspond, each of the chakras actually sits right at a vortex where one of the primary glands of the endocrine system lives. So the root chakra and the second chakra is connected to, obviously, our sexual organs, the ovaries, the testes. The third chakra, the power center, connected to our adrenal system. The heart center is the thymus and the hypothalamus. And then the throat is the thyroid. And then you have the pineal and the pituitary gland. So one of the best things that you can do on a just base, purely physical level is begin to balance out the endocrine system, which of course is so much about what we're unconsciously seeking in addiction, is that pleasure, pain. And so really balancing out the hormonal system, balancing out brain chemistry, is really important. And that does correlate. That's the best physical correlation with the chakra system.
Thank you for that. The endocrine system, I refer to it as the infinite pharmacy within, right, which has particular interest to, of course, anybody in recovery from at least drug addiction is very used to tinkering with their endocrine system through chemical and artificial means. So what you're talking about really is a refined way of working with the endocrine system to bring about the effects that you'd like to have normally or naturally.
Yeah, and of course, yoga is one of the best ways to do that, because you can choose specific poses or sequences that are targeting those glands, from squeezing those glands to twisting them to really getting them pumped up and flexed so that the tissue is alive and you're actually pumping fresh oxygenated blood into those glands, so then they are more healthy and secreting hormones in a more balanced way.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for your amazing perspective. For our listeners today, for anyone in the Recovery 2.0 community that wants to connect with you, I know you have some outstanding retreats coming up, and there's a lot of work out there. How can people connect with you?
Thank you so much. My website, very simply, it's Ashley Turner, TURNER.org. Organic. It's not .com, .org.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and we're really grateful to have had your voice be part of this Recovery 2.0 conference. And I know your words are going to ring true and be meaningful for so many people out there. So thank you.
Such an honor. Thank you so much, Tommy. I'm so humbled. I'm so honored to be a part of this community, and I'm so happy for the work that you're creating in the world. It's really needed, and it's amazing.
Thank you, Ashley.